Welcome to Monday, October 30th, Property Committee meeting, and we are ready to get this thing going. We have our quorum, 100% attendance. I like that. Thank you. Here we go. Last time we met, May 18th minutes. I'm looking for approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. And now we will move to the presentation of space allocation assessment. Josh?
Yes, so we appreciate y'all's time today. As y'all know, we've had two things assigned. The first was Taylor grading. Y'all have finished that up. And the second was looking at the cost of building. So as we brought up the cost of building and the potential for RFP with y'all, you all asked us to bring forth some space allocation initial assessments. And so you wanted to look at space holistically first before we, as part of the cost of building. And so today we got our central services team, we got Andrew and Beth here, and they're going to share some of their pre-work that they've done. So y'all, the full mayor commission did approve a full space allocation study in the budget, and I know our team is working on that RFP. But prior to that, as we thought about the process, we wanted some more initial review of this. And so the central services team has done that. And we're appreciative of it, and they're going to present that today and share some initial thoughts and recommendations as we think about Costa, and we'll talk about that as well as we go through this. So with that, I'll kick it to y'all.
Appreciate it. So y'all have been kind enough to go on some tours with us and see county facilities, and I really wanted to have an opportunity to benchmark where we were at with our facilities. The county has done a couple of space allocation assessments, most notably in 2010 with an update in 18, but they've been fairly limited in scope. So 2010 had only addressed judicial users. 2018 was judicial users plus some administrative users, but not all. And then Beth may know, but I'm not really aware of us having a time where we've taken a really holistic look. Maybe in the 90s is the best I could tell.
Yeah, back in the 90s.
And so if you think about the other types of users that we might have related to safety or even recreational spaces, not necessarily like the gyms, but where do you put the people that manage the gyms? That's going to be what we're covering in the broader extended space allocation, and there will be opportunities for us to look at other things. But since Costa was coming forward, wanted to take a moment to look at.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the need for that we're looking at is just for administrative space, not holistic and.
Correct. So, and I'll explain that here a little bit with the methodology and why we've gone the way we have. So. What I wanted to do was take that 2018 assessment and update it where we had some known pinch points. We're pretty sure that we would not recommend to you all that we would put a fire station into Costa. And we know that our judicial users have some end in sight. It might be several years out, but really for them, building a new judicial center is the path forward. And so to some degree, they need to kind of grin and bear it, and we can keep tweaking. But for us, the longer pinch point really is on that administrative side. So we wanted to take some time to update that and identify where challenges exist, and then to think about the different tools that could be deployed to help address those challenges. Methodology. So what we did is we went back and looked at the 2018 assessment, and we started with a staffing update. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment, but we would ask each department, what's your current full staffing census? How many staff do you actually have on hand now? What percentage of those work telework in some form or fashion? What percentage of them are eligible for telework? So we were trying to figure out how you might deploy those alternatives. We use that information to calculate existing space needs. So this doesn't account for any growth. We just wanted to say, like, where are we today? And then from there, we could look at where those pinch points are and think about how we might move units or modify space in order to better. When it comes to staffing, the prior two assessments have classified staff into 5 levels that are shown here. Basically, what it's acknowledging is that different levels, predominantly around supervisory experience, might have some need for confidential meeting space or a larger workspace. Whereas if you think about somebody like a part-time clerk or other part-time positions, really you just at that point get to a workspace. Where's the desk? And there's two levels of area that are defined. The first is the net area. That is actually the physical dimensions of the space. You see that in that third column. And the third, or the last, is the gross area. It's about a 1.54 multiplier. And so what that's saying is, yes, for every 10 by 15 office, you also need hallway, you also need restroom, you have these other spaces, mechanical room. And so that's captured in a broader footprint. And so if we have those updated employee numbers, we can calculate the current employee load and desire, but we can also take some of the prior stuff from the 2018 assessment. So for example, the 2018 assessment would identify that the planning department needs a large meeting space in order to hold planning commission meetings and hearings board meetings. And that's already quantified for us. It also would identify the types of storage spaces that are needed to maybe hold plans. Or other staff documents. We, for the purposes of this assessment, made no updates to those. We said whatever it documents them having is basically what we're going to assume the need is for the moment. The areas we assessed are many of the areas that you all had an opportunity to look at. City Hall, Civic Hall, Doherty, Satula, and then I'll just make a note, economic development is currently 100% telework. They kind of beg and borrow spaces as they need to for meetings and things of that nature. But one of the things that we did, because we were trying to look at this not just from the unit, but also from the building, like what's the resource that's available, is we actually captured data from operations that weren't done before. So for example, in 2018, we didn't capture data on the mayor or the manager's office or inclusion. They either didn't exist or it was just presumed that they would always be in City Hall, which I think is a safe assumption. And therefore, their space needs were not relevant because they weren't trying to figure out how do you put people in City Hall. They were trying to figure out what are our new needs. But for what we did, we went ahead and captured every user in the buildings. And so you're going to see some numbers that are basically ratios today. And anytime you see a ratio over 100%, it is basically indicating that in some form or fashion, that operation has exceeded the space allotted to it. And so there's a few tools that are available, and you've seen many, or if not all of them, in work. So of course, telework is a great tool. For the purposes of my assessment, if a position was using telework or telework eligible, we would actually only credit them with 40% of their space. So where you saw those numbers before, what we would say is, look, if you're telework, it is not an assumption that we're going to have a dedicated workspace for you. That's more where you're going to see that hoteling that you saw over in GIO. Optimized space, I use that generously. So if you think about like what we saw down in public information, where that used to be the mail room, now it's somebody's office, that's the level of optimization we'll get to. But it also could be something like, hey, how might we better organize records that are here? How might we source some furniture that's maybe a little more IKEA sized and not 1980s office sized, and make better use of that. And then of course, sharing space. Which is usually going to be paired with telework or some of those other positions, analyst, specialist, part-time positions. And so first what I'm going to take you through each assessment and what it means, and then we'll get to some recommendations. So within City Hall, we've actually seen, we were incorrect earlier, 35 positions added since 2018. So if you think about it, GIO at that time was just two staff positions. It's now 5 or 6 plus some part-timers. Inclusion did not exist. I will put a note here that of those 35, a significant number of them are inclusion fellows. You met 2 today. I think a full census of fellows is either 10 or 12, but they tend to work a highly remote environment.
Yeah, let me ask real quick. When you said the 40% sort of space need for the teleworker
Correct.
position, is that sort of a give and take for the telework, I want to say privilege option? Because not everybody gets that option.
Correct. So for the purposes of my assessment, yes. And that's actually something that we'll be asking in the formal space assessment. Like, let's not just go with Andrew's math. what are the best practices around telework? It could be that really a 60 or 75% ratio is more appropriate. But since telework for us was developed for the pandemic and then retained, what we just said is like, look, if you don't have the opportunity to telework, then the assumption of all those office spaces that I showed you before holds. But if you are teleworking, the demand on that space is maybe not quite as intense, or there's maybe pair that with an expectation for sharing, or like we saw in HR where you were taking a director's office and splitting it into 2 offices. Those are the types of spaces that we're developing in support of employees who telework.
All right, so it's supportive rather than perceived punitive.
It's not punitive, it's more about matching the space to the demand.
Right.
And I will say, I just took it on a straight, you're here 40% of the time, you should therefore need 40% of the space. It almost certainly doesn't work out that way.
Right.
But needed to have some kind of quick and dirty rules. So over here, you'll see the biggest thing here is that current utilization and max utilization are very different. And that has to do with predominantly vacancies. So either positions that were recently added in the budget or maybe just have not been filled. But you'll see within City Hall, there's a couple of pinch points that are projected that are current and will certainly get worse. GIO and inclusion really standing out. But really, City Hall, if you were to kind of add those numbers together, you would see as well at or above capacity.
And if we wanted to cross-reference how many people are in these departments, we could just look at our last year's budget book, right? And that's going to give us
Except for,
numbers.
that'll be FTEs, and it's not necessarily part-time employees as well. So you've got fellows, you've got some interns, and you've got part-time.
If you all would like, I can share some summaries of that. So all of this was backed by an extensive Excel spreadsheet that is overwhelming if you look at it. But if you wanted to know,
Just thinking numbers.
census by unit, we can get you that.
Okay, yeah, why don't you do that? Sounds like you might be able
I can make it
to
simpler.
break it down.
Yeah.
And then we'll get this so that we're not having to, we'll get this as a follow. As a matter of fact, if you wouldn't mind sending it to the full mayor and commission,
Okay.
just
I can send
so
it, yeah.
that they can
Sure.
dive in if they want to.
Yes.
GIO, is that government, or is that?
Geospatial Information Office, that's the folks that are over here and up in the top. They deal with not only maps, but they also work with our open data. Some of the performance tracking that you've seen around the ARPA funds is predominantly their work. So they're really about using data and maps to empower our citizens to understand the work we're doing and kind of share the stories.
So when you get deep into the website and pull up for data on maps or that, and so on that note, is their equipment so high end that they have to be here with it, or is some of that portable?
No, I mean, I think they work a heavy hybrid stuff.
They're able to work from home.
Okay, it's not like back in the day when you had at that.
They do strategic planning and all sorts of other data as well. So one of the things that they found though is, and I think this is what most people find with hybrid is, after a while you realize you miss the synergy of collaboration when you're not on site. So they work mainly on site, and they can work from home. They interact with, and all these offices in the manager's office are cross-cutting offices that work with all departments. And so they find it better to be on site as they engage with departments. So it's harder to do that from home for sure. So I think we've seen some departments continue to do hybrid, but a lot of ours who started with COVID have found that maybe 1 day a week they do it, but not as much as they used to.
So based on the current utilization of City Hall and the max, which would be fully staffed, 2 or 3 of the department need to exit this building, correct?
And we'll get, so yes, I think you're coming to a logical conclusion, and let's go through the first half. You'll start to get some recommendations in the second half.
Yeah.
Well, this is why we didn't send it in advance, because there's a lot of ideas here. We want y'all to start.
Yeah.
So Civic Hall, where the attorney's office and elections is housed, as you saw on the tour, elections is really bursting at the seams. Even the layout of their space, you heard Director Sesame talk about how we've created that secure space to the side where they do IDs. That wasn't around 10 years ago, and so there's always new burdens. We see that at their other facility on Lexington Road. where really it's about enhancing security and transparency, which are hard to always put hand in hand, but building confidence in elections changes the use of that space. With the attorney's office, you'll see that there, again, a vacancy or two is helping them, but that they're going to be kind of fully utilizing that space as they're staffed up.
Hopefully very soon. That's an announcement.
So Satula has added 18 positions since 2018. Those are predominantly within HCD, HR, and one or two in organizational development. So those are almost, I think they're fully full-time positions. As you recall, the Satula building users are probably our highest users of telework, and that has been their saving grace so far. And we've made a number of modifications, as you saw, and really we've only got a few more tricks up our sleeve when it comes to Satula about modifying space, and then we're just going to be flat out of it. So it's probably a limited tool that can be made available, but there's already getting to some operational challenges.
Well, it also, because when I was at the vet school, I left in 2003, so times change, but we have seen the break rooms are gone. And that was just part of work environment. You were in your office, focused, when you were ready to collaborate, the water cooler, that whole concept. It's just interesting to realize how those have become off. I just want to make sure we're giving what is the current trend for people and make sure that we're not losing. I mean, we're making good space decisions, but we're also losing what is a typical work environment.
We are, and we're actually almost having to think about space on the reverse. So when people have defined spaces, those break rooms provide that socialization and collaboration space where you might encounter people you don't usually do. When you share a space with 2 or 3 other desks, you're seeking a moment of respite when you have some downtime. So you're not actually seeking the break room. You want that abandoned picnic table in the back corner for a little bit of quiet. But that's maybe not optimal. That's just how people are adjusting to the environment we're given. Economic development is homeless. You'll see that they have doubled in size from 3 to 6 since 2018. They used to lease space down in the Chamber building, it's called. That was part of Mayor Denson, aligning them with other common purposes. It worked well, but when it came time to renew that lease, it was kind of in the early pandemic, and really Director McConnell just said, look, we don't need the space. The Chamber has said that for the short term, we can make use of their meeting space, and so I want to look at alternatives. And I think part of that was founded in the fact that as long as I've been around central services, they have been discussed as a likely tenant of Costa. And so from 2021 forward, you'll find their approach differs at times. What they have been uniform in is saying we would benefit from meeting space, copy room, presentation space. Whether or not we have dedicated offices, they're actually pretty flexible in that regard. So recommendations, we're going to go by building. So when you look at, and here what I've done is I've struck through where some modification is proposed to give you a sense of what does that do to that pressure. So you'll see the struck through value and then the associated other value. Within City Hall, if we were going to wave a wand and give you a best case scenario, the first recommendation would be that SPLOST would go lease space within the community. And one advantage to that is the way SPLOST is a different revenue stream from other sales and use taxes is they can use that for administrative purposes. So for example, like their admin assistant is a county employee, it's funded by a SPLOST revenue stream. So there would be a cost to the county, but that cost would come from SPLOST revenues, not from general fund allocations.
And it's currently in the contract that they do not need to pay for rent.
Right.
So that's something we'd have to work through too.
Thank you for looking into that detail, but when it came to whether they are in a dollar lease location or another location, the bucket comes from T-SPLOST or SPLOST.
You have the potential to source different revenue streams than you would have for general uses. Operational analysis, now that it's been reconstituted, getting up to action. We've spoken with Auditor Hassemer. You saw today, like they're fully using their space, or they will be. Basically, if they were to really have some acute need, we would suggest the green room would be available, but I don't think any of us say that that's necessarily going to happen in the short term. You actually saw the audio video room with all that equipment. So from a suite perspective, it would make sense to free that up for them, but that is not in the short or intermediate term budget. That audio video room is highly technical and engineered for that purpose. That's something that we would consider as, say, the judicial center comes online and operations start to shift to the former courthouse. Well, at that point, we might want to relocate the audio video room to the existing courthouse. Because we would anticipate that there would be more public meetings and more events happening over there.
Or duplicate it to the.
Potentially, you might be able to downsize. We won't lose chamber coverage. I can.
No, that would, there'd be a satellite version, but you're saying the main version would be where meeting. Okay.
We would then recommend that geographic or geospatial information office would move into the SPLOS suite. That takes a good bit of pressure off of this floor, and they happen to align with that math pretty well. And then the last recommendation would be for the inclusion office for you all to consider allocating space for them within cost.
Okay, go back to the last slide. So, inclusion office relocate to cost of 17,000 square feet. They're only using about.
It'll make more sense as we go through.
Okay.
But yes, you're right. I would not recommend the Costa only be the inclusion office.
And when we get to Costa, we'll also talk about the courthouse and how that kind of plays in some of the recommendations, because that's part of the context.
So, if somebody like me were making a little list of the cost of recommendations, I would take the 250 square feet.
For inclusion?
The inclusion.
No, you would take. So, I'm sorry. That 250 represents if you retain the inclusion officer's office in City Hall for some reason, and speaking with the officer, she said she didn't actually feel that need, so that's a bit of a lingering item. Their actual square footage needs around 2,100 square feet.
And that goes back to your beginning formula of types of positions and numbers.
Right.
And positions, not field or not. We're going with allocated positions, filled or not filled.
Correct.
Preparing for capacity.
Correct.
Okay.
So Civic Hall, really the pinch point here is on Board of Elections and how they're stacked in there. So part of that is already being alleviated. We are modifying space at 2555 Lexington Road. It used to be closets or storage. And so it will be set up to take off some of their pressure. But you think about that basement that you saw at Costa, for things like absentee voter registration, there might be some seasonality to some of their work. There's also materials that they need to have close by, but they don't have to have them right there. We would recommend that might be a good fit for the Costa basement. And they could even overflow with some part-time workstations if they really needed to. And then ultimately what we would recommend is that their presence in the second floor of Civic Hall would be eliminated, and that space would be available to the attorney's office as needed. So you have to kind of think about it. They would maintain their ground floor presence. That would be kind of their key customer engagement center. It would also continue to function with this building for early and advanced voting. But then some of their intermittent and administrative functions would spread to these other two sites.
And yeah, because the door for, I forgot her name upstairs, of the Board of Elections, must Debbie, that she has to unlock the door to show up over on the attorney's side.
Yeah.
For the restroom. So that that whole top floor.
And it's always created a little bit of a confidentiality concern because sometimes we're not there, people are using our restroom, and not that we don't trust people, obviously, but there's a lot of extraordinarily sensitive information in our office and equipment, and so
That's a security thing, and we were talking while we were on the tour about storage from one department doesn't need to be accessible by another, and we're talking actual space for that.
So the attorney's already at the top floor,
Mhm.
all of it, okay.
Remember
And
what
then-
Miss Taylor was? She had the
Well,
big
that
vault.
balcony door in the back,
Yeah.
and then polling, well, voter election will stay in the current position and use part of what we're calling now City Hall.
So they're gonna move some of their staff and ancillary operations to 2555 Lexington Road. That's underway. What we're saying is a lot of that other storage stuff, the on-hand materials that you might need once a month, that could be readily accessible in the ground floor of Costa. And that if needed, we could also set up that ground floor of Costa with some workstations. You gotta remember there's a seasonality to their work where they have to staff up with a lot of poll workers and part-timers, and then they kind of subside in the off cycles. And so that's where we would build some of that capacity. But for any voter or community member, if you wanted to engage with elections, it would start right there where they're at right now.
Go ahead. So will we have to build out for their security for that stored seasonal information?
So their high security stuff is at 2555 Lexington, where they have their unique access and a separate camera system. We would continue to encourage that. If there was a need, I can't tell you with 100% certainty that there wouldn't be a need. And even if it's not mandated by law, we may still want to have a camera on their storage, because you don't want, visitor Andrew to wander down there. Next thing you know, he's got a bunch of ballot registrations.
Okay.
So the attorney's office has 2,300, they need 25.
Correct.
All right, and the Board of Elections has 14, they need 35.
Correct.
But there's not, where would you put Miss Taylor on the first floor of the Board of Elections?
So
And what
if
is-
you remember that kind of the horseshoe up front where they run a lot of their part-timers, there's the opportunity to maybe pull that out. Ultimately what we did, because we ran some of these early ideas by department directors to make sure that it was functional. What we would say is if the space is dedicated for them, it's up for individual departments to tell us how they need to use that space efficiently and effectively. And so you got to remember that there's already going to be some of their staff leaving that space, going over to Lexington Road, just because the need is so acute.
So that's already happening.
That is happening.
So that transition is for the ramped up year of 2024.
That was
You're already helping them with that expansion.
Yes.
So when we presented the idea of Fire Station 2 to y'all, the other piece to that was the work over at Lexington Road. So when we pitched that to the Mayor and Commission at that meeting, that was the second half of what we were talking about.
And we ultimately recommended them for Lexington because we knew the need was acute, and because they already had an operation there, it made sense to continue for them to build around that rather than picking up, say, space in Fire Station 2, where then now they're spread across 3 locations.
Right. Well, no, I appreciate that. It almost seems like the basement of Costa could be the supplies that aren't personalized yet.
Correct.
And then the secure stuff that's been filled out that has, like you say, the confidentiality is where the confidential ballots are.
So, if we were going to really go long-term needs there, I would actually ask that we view that ground floor of Civic Building as a bit of a blank slate. Just because there's an office now doesn't mean that that's got to continue to be offices. We've got to work around HVAC and other mechanical systems, but as you've seen here and elsewhere, at times we move hallways, we move offices, we reconfigure space, and so you're going to start with what do you need for voting, and then you're going to build backwards from there.
She had that big workspace in the back. Like when she was getting ready to grab some teas and stuff like that. There's not room for her to have a big workspace on that ground floor.
Lexington Road.
No, I mean, there could be. There's not anything it did, we just.
No, I'm talking about when we came around back.
So that workspace we would propose might be something that would be good for locating into the ground floor of Costa, because it's not something that's needed all the time.
Because she was mailing out the schedule for.
Her desk is on the main.
She had an office upstairs.
So then that was kind of a security thing, because she's up there all by herself.
Right.
too.
But we're talking about moving her somewhere where her desk is, but then she'll have to go do workspace somewhere else.
Correct. Well, no. So you got to kind of think about, let's blank slate elections for a minute. If you want to think about downtown, first and foremost is voter services. Second thing that you're likely to consider is security. So what measures require some level of enhanced security that is well suited for that space? From there, you're going to start to look at the frequency and type of work and figure out, well, does it align with what's already happening at 2555 Lexington Road? Well, I might move that staff member over. You know, for example, their poll worker training all happens over there. So kind of the poll worker coordinator might not need to be downtown. And then if you think about what's happening on the second floor, the majority of that is storage with some workspace. So that workspace could be there. It could be that there's a downtown workspace that's built into the ground floor of Costa and a designated office. That's where we would recommend engaging further with design staff and end users so that we can really start to hit these pegs into the holes.
We work with them to help them more strategically use their space between the two sites. And right now, they haven't moved as many folks over to Lexington as they probably need to. But with all these moving parts, this would be the impetus to make sure that.
And the space that we're building out for them on Lexington Road, currently we're building out 4 cubicles, and then they'll also have a open workspace, and then they'll also have a storage space for banker's boxes. It will connect to their existing space, so it'll currently tie into their camera system, into their alarm system. It will all access the same. It's not like access here, go down the hallway, access here. It all connects. We're also building them out in their current warehouse where their voting machines are currently located, a private break room per se, where they have, because they don't currently have that without coming out and maybe going into facilities or landscapes. So they'll have their own little private break room also.
And they work some intense hours on
Yeah.
actions.
The
Yes.
next year is going to be an important time to visualize and assess peak use.
Where do they meet? Like, where do the Board of Elections meet?
At the training room, don't they?
They meet at both places. So the Board of Elections, the Tuesday night meeting is at planning, but occasionally they meet at the Lexington.
Okay. So they don't, you just don't bring them in.
No,
The
there's
elections.
no space.
All right.
Doherty Street building, you'll see that predominantly it's going to be public works and to some degree planning that have overused their space. Interestingly, we didn't show you building inspections. They will tell you where we're exceeding our needs, like that we need more space, but really the data says we need to design their space better. They have a lot of staff that are in the field, and so that kind of workspace differs from a staff member that's 8 hours a day at an assigned workstation. What we would recommend here is that we already are moving some public works uses to Station 2, and in response to this data, we're going to recommend that we go ahead and allocate the remainder of Station 2 for public works needs. At one point, we thought we might be able to put GIO over there, but what we actually find is GIO needs a slightly bigger and more adaptable space. And so because public works is already going over there, that just take the space and take the pressure off of what you got downtown. One important note about that data for public works, the 5,388 square feet, they currently have, I believe, 4 of the positions that are going to Old Fire Station 2 are 100% hybrid by necessity right now. So the fact that we're building Fire Station 2 gives them a workspace that they don't otherwise have. So we would recommend that we go ahead and pull those folks out. With planning and building inspections, we feel that we could probably continue to optimize within the space. And if needed, we could look at, like, say, for example, around planning, you've got that open entry when you come in. You could probably rethink about how we're using that. If you got into a real bind, you could start to look at, like, say, the meeting space that y'all saw that was next to the director's office, that's between up to the big one, like that could be subdivided if needed. So there's still some adaptation that can occur for the other two users. So moving second to last, you have Satua. Our recommendations would be that HCD would also move into Costa. And we'll get to that again, flesh it out here more for you in a minute. If you were to vacate that suite, you then free up that suite that would be predominantly used by HR, but you could also take one or two of those offices that's hallway adjacent and flip the entrance and have them accessible for organizational development. So while organizational development is high from a use perspective of 237%, it's actually not a ton of square feet that you need to satisfy their need. So that really takes care of those three users. Within finance, we still have some more tricks up our sleeves. We didn't take you on that tour, but they have a couple of meeting spaces. They have yet to divide a director space into two. So we feel that we can meet their needs for kind of the next 3 to 5 years with existing space. Oh, and I will go back. There's a specific request. I just want to point out, we're not adding any additional training space for org development, despite their request that we do so.
And
Even with the CDs, switch, it's still more people space, not training.
Yeah, you can't, just because of the way it lays out, it doesn't lend itself to it. So until a judicial center gets up and they find a new home, they're going to have to continue to use training sites across the county, like you've seen at the airport or the Bobby Snipes Center, planning. They really have to adapt depending on who their user is. And then last but not least, economic development. So remembering that they don't have a home at all, what we would actually recommend is that they be integrated into Costa, as has been discussed, but really in a highly flex and easily adaptable environment. So I don't know if you all have been in the innovation hub I think it's 808 Broad that the university runs. Be that kind of setup where you might have maybe 1 or 2 dedicated offices, but that doesn't mean that there's only one dedicated staff member in there, but that you would have a common meeting space, you would have a copy room if needed, things like that support their operational use, but that those would be available to other building users. Much like this building can use a common booking system, it would be a similar setup there.
And the other idea that was shared back in the day that's also in the strategic plan is that there would be community partners as well that would have access to space. And some of those stakeholders don't have actual staff, but they have folks that are leaders in those nonprofits. And conceivably that flex space could be shared with them as well. And there'd be collaborative space for economic development and their stakeholders to engage. Also groups like our MBE staff person, WM, the minority women business work, that staff person who's in finance right now, this could be a place for them to locate as well and engage with community businesses.
Sort of overlapping from the inclusion office and other functions. John, and then Patrick.
One thing about economic development, you talk about the future of the county, one of the most important things is economic development. I think they need to have a space. I mean, how do we entertain Meisner or anybody like that that's looking to come in if we don't have a space for them? I think we need to have jam up, place where we can have, state-of-the-art conference room and all the things that we can provide. I think that's important for the future of our county.
I mean, fundamentally, some of what they do is a sales pitch, right? They're selling employers on our community, and so that impression matters.
We agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Commissioner Coker said everything I was going to say. Like, that should be our top priorities: housing, economic development. But I did have a question. What's at Bobby Snipes? Who's there now? Just a water right? Who's
Water resources.
Yeah, so they do a lot of their water quality testing, but then they also have some of their environmental staff that are out in the field.
Lab space.
Yeah.
There's a computer lab, and that's the other big training room we use, or conference room for y'all as well as us.
I've not looked at that full space, but it seems like a lot of space out there.
Well, the entry, I mean, when you come in, it's very inviting and open. But that kind of detail will come up in the space allocation,
That's right.
the big study.
A little bit like you've seen today, not only do we want to understand the needs of our users, but I think it would be beneficial for us to understand the needs of our users in comparison to the spaces that are provided. Much like we saw with buildings inspections, the data says that we have the ability to meet their needs. And so if they're expressing a pinch point, instead of immediately diverting to like, let's go lease space or let's shuffle the deck, our first view should be to come in and say, okay, how do we use this space more effectively? Because you're nowhere in comparison to your peers.
Yeah, for somebody who sees you got to see it all, which
Right.
is why these field trips have been really, I think, helpful for us is to.
So that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, if there's space at Bobby Snipes, we can temporarily house economic development now, right?
We've looked, and there really isn't space. That was part of the last look when Gavin was helping and found space at Fire Station 2 in Lexington. We looked, and there really isn't that space option. Now, as we kind of transition here to kind of the cost of summary, what along those lines, the way we're thinking about this is, originally when Costa was envisioned, I think Mayor Commission thought there might be a lot of space potentially for the community. And so the mayor assigned an RFP to the property committee for community groups. What we really want to share with y'all and what Andrew's presentation here kind of is saying after our tours is we're really asking at this point for y'all to consider holding off on those RFPs. Maybe there's room for one, and Andrew can speak about the space, the community space envisioned here. But until we have a clear sense of what's going to happen with the judicial center and who's going to be able to move there, whether Satula and Doherty are going to be able to move to the courthouse, we really want to caution against giving away all the space within Costa, as we already have very few other options to pursue at this point. As there's more clarity in the next couple, 2-3 years about the courthouse, potentially that could open up a floor or two here at Costa. But we really want to think about this as not only as a home for these two departments potentially, but as a site to pivot people to while we're moving people to the courthouse as well, because that's all at play in the moment.
Yeah, motion to approve.
We've got a lot of space.
So yes, I've got about 3 more.
Yeah.
I just want to lead into this one with that.
No, I appreciate
So
that.
conceptually, here's one way that you could consider using Costa. If you were to take our recommendations and have economic development, HCD, inclusion, and then continue to have that elections function adjacent and integrated, it becomes a bit of a community service hub. Again, what floor they're on, I don't care. They're all more or less the same. But the thought here was, again, economic development. There's some prestige to being on the top floor, having the views, the rooftop deck. It's part of that sales pitch. HCD, I'll give you some numbers, but they really do have demand for a full floor. And then inclusion, supposed to be helping break down barriers and invite people to the community that have traditionally not felt a part of local government, having them be part of that ground floor setup. There may make some sense there. This is actually something Manager Williams pointed out. I think he referred to it as the great promise of the charter. But at the time that unification happened, my understanding is that one of the key concerns of city residents, and maybe specific to East Athens, was, hey, how is this going to benefit East Athens? And so this is actually some language that's in the charter about how a service hub and administrative functions should be built around it. So just pointing out that there is some alignment there. And then when you get to the actual numbers, what we would say is that even with those recommended uses, you still have extra space that needs to be considered. So if you were to follow that recommendation, you would see that you would have approximately a third of the top floor would be available for other uses. And that might be where you catch that synergy with some of our nonprofit partners that help with economic development. It might be where you do have a minority business enterprise position.
Yeah.
So potentially, yeah. So you have that as kind of set up on that top floor. Second floor, if you do HCD, they would occupy that full floor by our math, and that means they still might take advantage of a shared meeting space or shared copy room.
Because when those processes are underway and the community's coming in and the people engaging in the learning how to fill out the paperwork and the vision committee stuff, they have their ebb and flow of needing more space, cycling, yearly cycle with that as well, right?
They do. And then on the first floor, if you were to dedicate inclusion office to be on the first floor, there would still be approximately 1/2 of the floor that would be available, maybe even a little bit more. So it doesn't necessarily have to be only inclusion, but you might think about the types of users that are aligned with inclusion. Now, I'll tell you, if I go and I run more analysis, I could find more county operations to put in here. But I don't know that this is the time or the place. What we're really trying to accomplish is release some pressure, co-locate some common community service hubs, continue to work strategically at the Judicial Center, because that is our next off-ramp, is build the Judicial Center, rehab, and that's going to be a multi-year process. And then just so that y'all can't say that I only came in and gave you a sales pitch, these are the alternatives to consider. So if we didn't want to go with Costa, we can go lease space. Office space is available. There's some appealing things about leasing office space. But the biggest challenge is that using kind of common market rates in these square footages, we'd be looking at about $360,000 a year to relieve the needs just from what you've seen here. We could also look at making more use of our existing space. So an example of that would be right now, for example, ADDA is in an Athens-Clarke County space, not specifically ADDA, but downtown parking. That is part of the parking agreement. We get a credit for that. Mm-hmm. But that same credit could be used to go find space elsewhere, and that could become a county operation. You could say the same thing for the Smoker's Den. You could say that for the bottom floor Taylor Grady. You could even start to look at some of these users and say, why is there a nonprofit in here, or if there's an acute need? Mm-hmm. I don't recommend we go down that road without a very precise analysis and understanding of what the long game is, but it's a tool.
Which would be after that space allocation study would also help. And GOC, once they're done with their work.
And then, of course, we can continue with the status quo, but hopefully what you've seen is that we really are running into operational challenges, you know, people not being able to have confidential meetings, accessing secure buildings to use the restroom. Like it's getting absurd, and facilities has done a lot to make these spaces available, but we're running out of tricks up our sleeves. And so at some point, we just have to live with this as the condition. Ultimately, I would suggest that over the next 5 years or so, we may actually use all of these tools, mm-hmm. even if you do pursue Costa. But and so if you did go forward with Costa, here's some steps. But what I would say is we would not recommend that Costa be designed specifically, let's say HCD, that we make all these enclosed offices and defined space. We would recommend that it stay open, adaptable, because the vision is not that they stay there forever. Whether or not they do, I can't project how the county will grow, what resources will come available, but they have always been envisioned to land in a common county facility that is these organizations plus finance, plus HR, plus some of the units here, that it becomes more of a one-stop hub for your average community member. And so we would say don't abandon that vision. And so therefore, continue to keep those spaces to where they're easily adapted. If they do move over, maybe that's when there's more of a community purpose that can come in. Or however, we need to continue to shuffle folks as we pursue the Judicial Center. And it is broken down into a couple of phases here, kind of the low-hanging fruit and the next steps. But bullet 1 is underway. Really, if you all were to make a recommendation to the body regarding Costa, that sets the stage for us to become a bit more precise in our planning and needs.
Right. And then we'd be able to bring back estimates to y'all in terms of how much it might cost.
Right.
And I think we could also come up with more defined, as we showed you, there were spaces that were unused that maybe doesn't completely end this charge. It could be that, 1/3 of the front of Costa remains a community space, and whether it's ADDA or Bob's Bakery or whatever that's going to go in there, that's, I think, part of what, speaking from this committee, but really can't tell you how to do that until we start to fit the pieces in the puzzle.
Right.
With that.
And the other piece we would do, if y'all are on board with this, is we would go work with economic development in terms of that third floor and begin brainstorming with them who those people might be that would engage in collaborating with them in that community space too. And then we could bring back more details to y'all.
Well, this is a lot of information. I'm hoping when you were gonna add some more, like the number of people in there. Can you add on the part that speaks of elections in Costa, could you make sure it's the non-public, put non-public elections? So that I just want to keep that clarification. We talked through it, and then we'll get this too. I don't know about you guys, but that's a lot of stuff. I'd like for us to meet again and maybe, you don't want to talk again? You don't want more information?
Can you go back 3 slides? You mind, Madam Chair?
Well, no, I do not, Commissioner Dada.
I'm ready to move this to the full American mission, minus the RFP for community. Just one question about FFP, like the build out. That's not part of the budget. We don't have any funds for that.
No, but what we might do is work with SPLOST to cost that out and bring some potential solutions as part of any recommendation that comes from the project committee. So we could do that math. I think what we would do is, and SPLOST is gonna want us to come with funds, so we'll have to work to figure out where that would come from. We've got some initial ideas, but it's gonna depend on how much they price it out. But all that's dependent on what y'all want to see, because we didn't want to do all that work if y'all were thinking.
Just for Costa, since it's nearing completion, correct? Almost.
So it's supposed to be completed next summer. But as you heard Manager Williams say, we probably are in a period of 8 to 12 weeks where if these things aren't understood well, we're going to miss opportunities to put them in a more cost-effective manner.
You mean like, can we say, don't break up the center of the first floor with a new stairway to the basement?
Yes. Right.
Can we make that recommendation?
You can, but that's dependent on who's on the first floor, right? Because if it's a tenant who we don't know who it is yet, we might want to leave that option open to them because they might want access there. So,
not if we're doing this.
But if we're doing this, we would say no.
Not if we're doing this, because then they would have their privacy by not having 2 stairways down there, and then they have the door.
Well, and if you look at the
outside,
and I'm sorry I don't have copies for you today, but the basement floor plan, and we'll be sure to send those out. And then the first floor plan, the Costa, that stairway is weird because it divides spaces that would otherwise be.
You're talking about the hole they were using for the rail.
Right. So if you imagine even coming into the first floor, the difference between having a stairwell there versus being able to have, say, maybe you do a glass partition and that's all one suite. It makes sense when you think about if you're going to try to stack them together, but.
And we get what I'm trying to get at, though. I think this, we can move on now. But
detailing person that I am, I was looking for more information, but if the only thing that staff needs to move forward is us going with this idea, I guess I was looking for an agenda report that would go with it. I thought we would want to include things maybe it's just you guys saying this would happen in this timeline, sort of a broad timeline for it. But if there's 8 to 12 weeks to help them put the floor back together, you do what you need in the basement with the conveyor belt, and then close that back up so that it gives maximum space usage for this idea. If that's all that needs to come from here to move forward, Or, because kind of in the weeds with that decision, but yet the other decision is pretty broad.
Right, so if your recommendation is to dedicate this to staff space except for these areas, and we can do an RFP for that, or we can come up with this process. I think we'll have to figure that piece out.
Well, actually, I think you could take it like, if you think about it in the SPLOST development terms, what this slide here and some of the supporting data is a concept. The concept is, let's put these functions in concept. That allows us to get to the schematic level and say, well, what does that look like as a footprint? And that will identify the ancillary areas. Once you understand where those are and kind of what they might look like, then I think you revisit, well, what's the concept for how you use those?
And then it comes back.
And then we would be at an RFP stage again with a better timeline.
Right, and just, the space you have to work with versus the staff.
And
space.
the potential timeline.
What are we doing an RFP for that?
Yeah.
RFP would be good to the slide that has the extra space. So in my mind, that there would be an RFP for other entities to chime in and say, gee, I'm so-and-so,
Good nonprofit.
whether it's the nonprofits that are paying $1 a year or it kind of goes, it could
So
go in line with what other uses of our community
I want
You can need to use the whole building.
Yeah, I just want,
or ACC Gov.
Yes.
that's my train of thought too.
Yeah.
I
Didn't
spent
see that
that's my mind is the RFP in the community. We do,
We've got a lot of community space.
yeah, we got a lot.
We need to be fiscally responsible, I think, and utilize, we've got other space we're renting, that we're having to rent from other places, other businesses. We've got something that we can use versus having to spend money somewhere else. If we're putting a nonprofit in there and they're only paying $1 a month or $1, whatever it is, $1 a year, we're losing money. We've got a lot of facilities that we can provide community. So,
And as if Andrew's correct, so once we do the space, once we go through this process, if there's space left over, we can come back, correct?
This is the space, maybe on the right column.
Say yes. So, I mean, I guess what you could say is, if y'all were to recommend this concept and even say, like, peers, we think you're gonna end up using the whole building for the county operations, but we want to start here. I think we can start to design those ancillary spaces to have that adaptability for other, whether it's a nonprofit partner or I actually would say on the top floor for economic development, we might want to ask them what the flex space looks like, because there's a lot of communities that have done that kind of incubator or collider differently, and it might be to our best advantage that this body and ultimately the Mayor and Commission makes the guidelines by which economic development uses the space, but leaves them the flexibility, because it might be that there's a small business that they just need an office for 6 months. And that's going to be enough to get them stood up and out they go. And so you almost could become too prescriptive if you're not careful.
like the university, they've got businesses that are in there
Right.
until they grow enough to have a space.
Correct. So what we're going to be doing next is definitely, hitting the market and getting somebody lined up for the space allocation assessment. It could be that the remainder and cost of that future is not decided until we get that data. And until then, we're just setting up, shelling it out, making it ready to go for either county use or
another rotation if something were to happen at Satula faster than, again, having space, like the shell game again, potential. And then there had been talk of a minority business opportunity. So so I think it's good if we want to move forward that we've identified some good stuff. This is all good. I understand the methodology for sure to be able to back it up as an item for full support. But it's not taking all the space necessarily. So we're not closing the door on the potential of what we were originally charged with that. So we have 10 minutes, maybe 11. Is there a motion? Sure.
Motion to do everything this vision cost of building Yeah,
Move forward with an agenda item?
yes.
And do we know how that drops into the cycle?
Well,
At this point?
I'll definitely talk with, the manager and the mayor, and one option might be that we give a somewhat similar presentation at work session even, right? And so we could potentially package this for the next work session. I just gotta see if we've got time. So our schedule is usually have these agenda items done by, we got agenda review tomorrow, Wednesday, I think.
So we've missed this.
We might be able to catch this one, so we'll do our best.
So you said 8 to 12 weeks. We got Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I don't want to see y'all.
Yeah, we want to get this in this next cycle. If you don't vote, we're gonna do all we can to get it in the next cycle.
Okay.
I'll guarantee that.
That comment's not in the motion.
It's not.
I just want to be sure.
I love you.
So then moving it forward would be you guys adding it into however it fits. Do I have a second for that motion? A second for John. Let's go ahead and vote. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. So then if it goes to you to develop what would be an agenda item and put it in the cycle, if we were a committee of 5, half of the commissioners, I would ask for it to get fast tracked. But since there's only 3 of us, we do have a lot of catching up to do with the other 7.
Mm-hmm.
But if the mayor and the manager think that this could be slid in as an agenda item without a work session, I support that.
That's going to.
All right, and then what we'll do is we'll draft it and we'll share with you, share like we would share a GOC with.
Yep. And then when you update this presentation, send it to everybody, then those who want to start reading about it can do it.
And we'll do that, we'll wait to do that until we know whether there's gonna be a work session or not, because then we would want to present this at work session too, so we'll talk to you about that.
But it won't be the Thursday work session because the chair of this committee will not be in town.
I got you now. Okay. Good to know.
So we're trying to put this on the agenda for next week.
No,
Okay.
the cycle for
December.
Yes.
December.
We can't
If
hold
we're
out.
lucky, if we're
Yeah, I was
lucky.
about to say that.
If we're lucky.
Yeah.
And then it gives it in the regular cycle, but still a little fast track by not having a work session.
Well, and not to get too far ahead of anybody, but just knowing the recommendation of this body at least allows us to go back to the design team for Costa and say, what would it look like if you were going to make a flex space for, office and administration? They can start on that without, should be cheaper than a set of stairs to the basement. And then if we get feedback from the commission of like, no, try again, we can pause that without a huge investment. So what we won't do is try to get to where we miss that critical path. We'll try to keep those things moving, but not also presume that this is a done deal either.
Right, and the other important thing that this captures to me is that we don't have time with the cost of building to wait for the full
There you go.
space allocation study. There's no time for that.
So the SPOS project, there's funding to do what? Just build the shell?
Construction, yeah.
Okay, then do we have to have, how would we fund the build that?
We'll work on that too as part of this process, and we'll give you all an update, but, can potentially fund balance or something like that.
And then knowing which departments there are, I don't know if any of them would come with additional. HCD doesn't have any.
Yeah, one more thing.
They have some, but some of these departments have budgets, so that'd be a good place to start looking. Some of them have FF&E, and what can be adapted, what needs to be let go for inefficiency.
Is there money in space modernization, SPOS? Can you use any of that? But that's all judicial.
There's not, at this point, we don't think that would be a spot to look, but we do think something like fund balance might make sense in this case, and we'll have more to share with y'all on that soon.
But there's not a chance of pulling it from any other SPOS.
I don't think so at this
Well,
point.
we
We'll definitely,
could just let the creative brain
we'll
power
look, we're gonna look.
come through.
SPOS project to do what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Right, but it was over budget, so we've had to kind of make do with what we got.
And then also to note too that, the part about looking for money was also how to help relocate SPOS out of City Hall.
And I'm just going, is it correct that y'all's intention is, you recommended this concept, so even though there's space for splosh, that we're not putting them here, we're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, your whole analysis, it even wasn't the cost, I thought those were good, we've been talking about it a good bit of time, is who's in our buildings, who are we paying to be in a building that we don't have, and who is paying to be in our buildings. So all of that's gonna come about with the space allocation study, and I think that you've done a good bit of their work, so hopefully they can get a jump start.
We will certainly
And a reduced rate.
Yes, exactly, we're additional. So what else?
I know there's one last thing. I want to make sure that
Yeah.
we to the last item.
Right, are there any Taylor Grady updates that are worth, that need a decision or just?
No decisions needed. At this point, they have moved in. We did a walkthrough with their representatives and our facilities and landscape team. Kind of like you would do with any tenant, turning over the keys, but we also walked away with a small punch list of little things we need to take care of. The biggest takeaway from that walkthrough is we did come to a bit of a informal consensus about a limited portion of the basement, specifically the stairwell and the first door to the right, which is actually where all the HVAC controls are set up. So we have told them, hey, you will retain access to this for these purposes, but we've actually changed or are changing the locks on the other spaces so that they're not going to be something that event staff would stumble into.
For the public.
And then we are working to finalize, we have all the stuff from their insurance, but we actually haven't gotten the final policy documents. And so we're working to track those down from their agent. And then at this point, I think all the utilities have transferred into their name. So I'd say it's going as expected.
Can we move SWAS into Taylor Grady? Basement?
Potentially.
It would have to be, you'd have to have funds to renovate it.
I'm saying
You'd
like,
have to cut it.
would that be a good, you give me that, okay, that ain't my number.
I'm hesitant to make a recommendation on Taylor Grady until we know, like,
Okay,
that's the least worst option.
okay.
Just because there's a tenant there's some functional things. So for example, in the lease, we reserve the right to access 4 parking spaces, but in theory, Splost would need more than 4. So there's some stuff that just becomes challenging. That's not to say, so again, my recommendation is not to just cut it loose until we know we don't need it, but really think, especially because they have a different revenue stream, putting Splost on a path to lease a space makes the most sense at this time. Because, even from the work you're doing at the Judicial Center, the current Judicial Center is 73,000 square feet and the target one is 172,000. Like, that speaks to the need for space. So we definitely have the need, but it's just making sure we're taking care of the right ones.
Mitchell Bridge?
Now, historic number 2.
Could they go in there? It's possible, right?
Possibly. That is currently leased to Historic Athens.
So we'll see how that leasing goes at GOC.
Yeah.
That might, okay, so property committee, have we done what we need to do
Right.
until we check in with our full merit commission? All right, now I need one more motion.
So, Jen, please.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? All right, so Jen, thank you.
Thank you all.
Guys, we'll miss you, but you should pull us in as needed.
We will update you soon. We
We'll see
appreciate
how this
it.
rolls in December.